Hello and welcome to the Polymath World channel. It is such an honor today to be joined by NASA astronaut Charles Gemar, whose distinguished career I'm so excited to get into. It's always a treat having astronauts on the show, and today's going to be really special. Charles, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Would you mind just telling us a little bit of your background before you became an astronaut? Were you one of those children who watched the moon landing and dreamed of doing it yourself?
Well, yeah, sure. I grew up, during the era of Gemini, Apollo, Mercury, of course, and every kid, my generation kind of aspired to three careers. We wanted to be policemen, firemen, or astronauts. That was kind of the three career choices that we all seemed to aspire to at that time. But I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, right in the middle of the country. We were in a farming community for the most part. I spent a lot of time, just like any other kid, playing sports and swimming in the summers and hanging out with friends. But I always had an interest in mechanical things, large equipment, machinery on the farm and other places, and of course, when we landed on the moon, that was just an incredible experience. For all of us, a matter of national pride and a source of national pride. And of course, we're all glued, to those events as they happened. Yeah, I was inspired by the early astronauts, and I always had that interest in mechanical background and mechanical interest, and so for me, it just seemed, kind of a natural progression. I always wanted to fly. I thought flying in space would be the ultimate flight experience, and I certainly haven't been disappointed. It certainly was. But I had a bit of a non-traditional background and career path. As you probably know, I started out as an enlisted soldier in the United States Army after high school. So at 17, I enlisted in the Army and spent a couple years in the active duty Army as an enlisted soldier, and then went on to military academy at West Point and graduated there with a Bachelor of Science in Science and Engineering with concentration in aerospace. After that, I did my first couple tours as an Army officer and applied to NASA in 1984. Was selected in 1984 or 85 with the astronaut group 11 selection.
What was the name of your astronaut class?
Well, it's interesting, Sam. Our astronaut class never really gelled an identity, and I think part of that is because about 4 months into our tour there, of course, we had the Challenger accident. And
Yep.
so levity and jocularity and those kinds of things were not really part of that experience at that time, right? So I think that our class suffered in that regard from forming that class identity, like the astronaut group 10 and subsequent classes. I think our class, we got pulled out of training early to get completely involved in the Challenger investigation and recovery back to flight. So we never really had that class identity that the other groups kind of enjoyed.
Yeah, it's certainly, it must have been such a whirlwind experience at that time. You have the Challenger disaster and your class graduates just a few months afterwards. Was there any uncertainty as to whether you would fly at all? Because everything was really up in the air.
Well, sure, and that's a great question, because somebody had to ask the question after a Challenger accident. Should the space shuttle ever fly again? Should we mothball it? Should we just sideline it and go on to something else, or go on to nothing else? I mean, that was a question at the time, and President Reagan made the presidential decision that yes, absolutely, we should continue. He pressed for funding, of course, for the Space Shuttle Endeavour to be built and added to the fleet. So he answered that question. Once that question was asked and answered, well, then it was up to us to execute. And I think it was certainly a pivotal time in America's space program, because it could have gone the other way just as easily.
Yes, and the shuttle didn't fly for about 2.5 years, going through a lot of sort of design changes, particularly around the solid rocket boosters. How soon was it until you were assigned to your first flight?
Yeah, actually, about the time we were just getting ready to start to fly, I was assigned to my first flight. So about July of '89 was when I was selected to fly in the following year in July of 1990. And of course, there were a few delays to that, and we ultimately flew in November of 1990. But the original flight schedule was the first week of July in 1990.
Now, STS-38, your first flight on Atlantis, which a lot of people say is their favorite, although I don't understand the differences between the shuttles. I understand you can't talk about it much because it's a Department of Defense mission, but it's 5 days. Just tell me what the flight is like, because I ask people about what launching on the shuttle is like, and I get everything from it's the most terrifying experience, it was horribly uncomfortable, to it was the best experience of their life. So what was it for you?
Well, it's all of that. It's remarkably, it's all of that. So the terrifying part is not on the launch pad. It's not on orbit. It's not in the spacecraft. If there is a terrifying part, it's the night before,
Right.
when you're faced with the reality of spaceflight. You're alone with your own thoughts 8 to 12 hours before liftoff, and you honestly have no idea what the outcome of this flight will be tomorrow. And so it's not that you feared, for yourself, although for sure, I mean, we're all human. I didn't want to check out of the net. I had plenty of unfinished business. But you fear mostly for your family, for your parents, for your friends. And that's why that night before, I think, matters, and why it becomes, you're a little apprehensive, nervous, hesitant that night before, but you get through all that. And of course, when you wake up the next morning, you're absolutely ready to fly this flight. People's lives are depending on you to do your flight, or do the flight and do it well, do your job. And we're trained to do that. And so we just get up and go through the motions, and head out to the launch pad. And of course, that time on the launch pad, we have about 2 hours and 45 minutes. With the International Space Station, it's even a little bit longer than that. They would strap in about 3 hours and 15 minutes early. Um, but that time is spent mostly for the Mission Control Center team and the Launch Control Center team. So for the astronauts on board the spacecraft, it's fairly relaxed environment there. We'll tell a few jokes amongst each other, give each other, a mild chiding of all the things we learned working together over the last year. And then of course it gets very serious once we get closer. Once you get within the 10 minutes of launch, now it's very serious inside the cockpit, and your focus goes from out here to here. And um, and, and of course we'll go through the APU pre-start, we'll go through the APU start, and at that point there is no question in your mind that we're going to make a launch attempt today, because we don't start the APUs unless we're absolutely certain that we're going to go for launch. And about 3 minutes and 40 seconds or so, the gimbal sequence check goes through its motions, and they pivot all the main engines back there, swing them around the stops, make sure that they've got good steering commands. And you can feel that whole shudder up and down the spacecraft, right? 127 feet below you and behind you. And then of course the launch director is going to tell you to close visors, open pseudo 2, have a good flight, wish us well. We're going to thank the team, and now everything on board the spacecraft is extremely serious. The commander will give a 1 minute warning, and that's for the benefit of the mid deck crew, because they don't have any CRTs, no instruments down there telling them where we are in the count. So and then of course at 37 seconds before liftoff, the main computers take over, and then 7 seconds that those main engines come up to speed, and they're going to generate 100% thrust while we're still bolted to the ground. And you can imagine that you're getting bounced
Yes.
around inside that spacecraft quite violently. The whole thing rocks forward, and at that point, solid rocket boosters fire and off you go, and it's just a major kick in the seat of the pants at that point as you unleash the 6.5 million pounds of thrust required to get this vehicle off the ground.
Yeah, other astronauts I've spoken to say that there isn't really any way of dealing with that kick in the pants because there's no way of simulating that in training.
No, that's right. I mean, most of the training, as you can imagine, is very complete. And I always say there are no surprises in spaceflight. I mean, the training is that good and that
Yeah.
complete. There's a couple events that I don't think you can train for effectively. That's one of them, that moment of liftoff, and then the other one is the solid rocket booster separation. So at 2 minutes and 5 seconds, when those solid rocket boosters separate, for us, my first launch, it was at night. So Space Shuttle Atlantis, that was the fifth time we'd actually launched at night from the Kennedy Space Center, and of course it's dark. And the last thing you kind of want to see and hear as you're going uphill in the middle of the night, it was early evening, but it was dark. It is a pyrotechnic explosion and a big flash of light. Right, that was a bit unnerving, and so training didn't really well prepare us, for that event. I thought maybe the commander could have given us a heads up.
Yeah. Yeah, you strike me as a very versatile astronaut because you've got a military background, you flew planes, you're a pilot, and you have the engineering background as well, and the engineering training. Did your military background sort of play into your selection for this mission?
It's hard to say. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I suspect that part of that did play in. It was a classified flight. I was a military astronaut. I did have a number of clearances up to that point. Of course, we needed more to conduct this mission. So it certainly didn't hurt me in any way to have had that military background. But as you know, we have flown civilian astronauts on classified flights. Kathy Thornton
Yes.
flew a classified flight, and she was a civilian astronaut, although she was in the reserves. So she had that connection to the military as well. Um, but but it was for me, it was personally rewarding and professionally rewarding, both because of my first flight and my background as a military officer.
Yes. Now you had. I thought this was really amazing. It's less than a year between your first and second flight. That's really quite wonderful. I mean, it must have been wonderful. But just not even 12 months later, you're flying on STS-48. This time on Discovery. For a science mission, and I was really, really interested in the details of this mission. So could you tell us a bit more about how you got selected for this and what the preparation process was?
Yeah, I mean, you're right in recognizing that was a very quick turnaround. A couple things I think that were in my favor that contributed to that was the UR's mission was actually pulled forward. It was one of the few missions that we actually pulled to the left and launched earlier than its original schedule. So that helped in that they had to have a crew that maybe we could abbreviate the timeline a little bit, the training timeline. And because I had just come off of a flight, now my training was very current, and so it was a little less overhead to bring me on board as a mission specialist and do that. Um, so I think that contributed. But yes, you're right. I mean, I was in Washington D.C. We were doing post mission debrief with the director of the Central Intelligence Agency and President Bush elder at the time, and when I got the phone call in the hotel that night that I'd been selected for a second mission.
Wow, that is fortunate. That's really quite amazing. You must have been delighted. Now you're studying the Earth's upper atmosphere. Could you explain some of the science and what this mission was doing?
Yeah, so basically the mission had three primary purposes. One was to determine the chemical composition of the upper atmosphere, understand all the constituent components of the upper atmosphere. The second was to understand how those chemicals are being transported around the globe, kind of winds and weather of the upper atmosphere. and then finally how much energy is being put into the Earth's atmosphere, both direct radiation from the sun and reflected energy back off the Earth's surface. And so about every 28 days, that satellite would do a flip maneuver. So we'd look at the northern hemisphere, and then it would do a flip maneuver, and we'd look at the southern hemisphere. It was a high inclination flight, so it covered roughly 90% of the world's surface population at least, and of course it operated. Original design life was 36 months, and that was because of some consumables on board the spacecraft, but it lasted almost 20 years.
Wow.
Now we collected the science for about 15 of those years, and at that point they were satisfied that they'd met all the mission objectives and stopped funding the data collection. So, but the instruments were still operating. Many of them, not all, but many of them still when the satellite re-entered 20 years later, almost to the week, 20 years later. Now, a couple interesting things happened during that time that made that satellite, I think, even more, kind of applicable and important, is that we had two major events in the world during that time, shortly after that launch. One was you had the Kuwait oil field fires as a result of Persian Gulf War One. And so that put tons and tons of pollutants into the atmosphere. You could see those smoke palls for 1,500 kilometers downrange from the source. The other major event, and you probably go back and kind of remember some of the sunrises and sunsets of that era, was the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. Put tons and tons and tons of sulfur dioxides and other particulates into the upper atmosphere. So the upper atmosphere research satellite was able to study that over time, and how the atmosphere reacted to that and how it cleansed itself.
Wow, gosh, what a fascinating mission to be a part of. It's only a 5-day mission, but you did do some extra science as well during that mission that I wanted to ask you about. I did a master's in molecular biology, so the question of protein crystals and protein crystal growth in space. I remember actually having a debate in a class about it, because no one, my professors did not dispute that growing protein crystals in space was much higher quality, like much purer than you could grow on Earth. But the debate was always about the cost of doing it in space, and could you get the data the same way? And, no one wins on that. I was always in favor because I love space. So, could you tell us a bit about that? I'd be fascinated to hear. I know you did it on your third mission as well, but growing protein crystals in space.
Yeah, I mean, so for us, it was, it was a fairly straightforward experiment on board one of the secondary payloads that we carried. And as you point out, we did that on both the second and the third mission. So, and of course, your background and expertise is, far exceeds mine in this particular area. But as you point out, we can grow a more pure protein crystal in space in that environment. But because of the delicate nature of those crystals, the other piece of that, that becomes problematic, is getting them home intact and being able to get them to the lab for further analysis, right? So just because of the delicate nature of the crystals themselves. So for us, it's pretty straightforward. We have pull out basically a tray of that we're going to use. We start the growth and then let it ride with very little involvement. It's really, we just get it kind of started, and then it does its thing until it's time to put it away and come home.
Do you recall much of the medical or scientific benefits of those proteins?
I personally do not, but there should be, the published material is out there and certainly available.
Now, another thing I noticed about this mission, STS-48, is you landed at Edwards, as opposed to, I think in your first mission you did land in Florida, didn't you?
Well, we were supposed to land at Edwards, but because of bad weather, actually on the first mission, that was originally planned for a 4-day mission because it was Department of Defense, which is typical for Department of Defense missions. And we, because of bad weather at Edwards, we waved off a day, and then eventually landed the next day at the Cape. On STS-48, we were scheduled to land at the Cape. We ended up at Edwards in the middle of the night.
So it was the other way round.
It
What?
was, and all for the same reason, bad weather.
Yeah, I generally find astronauts always quite happy to have the extra day in space
Oh yeah,
without a packed
absolutely.
schedule. What was
Uh,
re-entry and landing like for you?
so each one is a little bit different. On STS-38, there was a major smoke event. There were some controlled burns that were happening around the Cape. Dick Covey always talks about that. That was the first time we made an instrument approach in the shuttle, because it wasn't, until about 15 feet or 1,500 feet above the ground that he actually broke out and could get a clear view of the runway. He's just following the instruments up to that point. But before you get to that point, of course, you have your deorbit burn. You're starting to come through the atmosphere. It's of course, you've got hot plasma reforming over the spacecraft, completely envelops that. You can see that kind of flashing off of the windows, the overhead windows, as you pass through that, and of course off the front windows as well. They're just going to get white hot. You're going to continue through. I would say around Mach 10, maybe we got a little bit of buffet from the, starting to get a little bit of buffeting as we come down through the atmosphere. And then as you get lower, that may increase a little bit more, but it's a fairly benign environment. You're going to start to feel a little heavy, awkward as you start to feel the effects of gravity again.
Was it a lot of
on
fun?
on Well, yeah, it's always a lot of fun. Although, as you pointed out earlier, the suit is not very comfortable. So it's, inside that launch and entry suit, it's probably 100 degrees plus inside that suit. So it's not very comfortable. So you're certainly ready to get rid of it once you get home. And of course, STS-48, we waved off the first deorbit attempt, and then because of bad weather, and then we landed at Edwards, and it was around midnight that night when we came in, and I remember, we came down across, kind of descending pass along Alaska, Seattle, down the coast of California, and when we kind of did our overhead maneuver there, asked the commander if he could see the runway yet, and of course he couldn't. It wasn't until we got to about the 90-degree point in the landing that he could actually see the runway down there. So when you're coming down, you're a minute from landing and nobody can identify the runway yet. That's not as comfortable as you might expect.
No, no, that's quite unsettling.
And then of course, and finally on my last mission with 62, we had a little bit of crosswind, and so as we were correcting for the crosswind, if you go back and look at some of that landing video, you can see that the spacecraft had a couple yaw and rolling events that were not all that comfortable inside the spacecraft. But again, all of it, but at the end of the day, it was all very controlled, all very comfortable, and professionally handled by the crews, by each one of the commanders.
Yeah, let's talk about STS-62. This is your third mission. You're flying in Colombia this time, so 3 missions, 3 different birds, but this is another science mission. This time you've got the microgravity lab. You're doing more protein crystals, which is terrific. But there were a couple of things about this mission I found quite interesting. Obviously, your first 2 missions are 5 days. This one is more than twice that. So, first thing I wanted to ask you: did you experience ever any sort of space sickness, or when you landed, did you feel any effects from having a longer mission?
Sure. So for me, my first day symptoms were always about the same. About about 4 hours into the flight, I would have about a nausea. And and then and it's a little bit different than the flu, if you will. It's you're just going about your normal business. All of a sudden, you just kind of have this sudden sense of nausea. You go ahead and take care of it, and then you're good to go again, and you just continue on with the mission. Now, everybody's symptoms are a little bit different. Like I said, mine were about 4 hours into the flight or so. I would experience a little bout of nausea, and but some have much more severe, and some don't react at all. I mean, we've had crew members that, as soon as the main engine's cut off, they'll go down and grab a sandwich and eat. Right? That wasn't me. so, uh, and we had others that were sick for 3 days, right? That had nausea for 3 days, or longer in some cases. I think John Glenn was one of those that he felt like he was sick for a long time. Or I'm sorry, not John Glenn, Jake Garn. Uh,
Oh
Jake
yes,
Garn was
yeah, it's
yeah
legendary, isn't it?
yeah he was sick for a long time, and so anyway, everybody reacts a little bit differently. Um, the After you land, the recovery is highly dependent on your physical condition before you left, your age, and mission duration, right? And all three of those things, have an interplay, an interactive play there. I would say on my first mission, we didn't have any exercise equipment on that flight. So when I came back, it was basically after laying off for 5 days,
Mm.
just that in that space environment. Now, my typical pre-flight condition training regimen at that time was to run 3 to 4 miles 3 or 4 times a week. I felt good the next day. I came home, felt good, woke up, got out, did a run. The following day, I was so stiff I could hardly get out of bed. My muscles had deteriorated that much in just a 5-day mission.
Wow.
On the second mission, I don't remember having that issue. Of course, we did have exercise equipment. We did use it, and then on my last flight, uh, 14 days. Again, we had exercise equipment, but now I'm 5 years older, and the mission is 9 days longer. I would say it took maybe 30 days to get back to my pre-flight level of conditioning, and I had some muscle soreness and some joint pain along the way. But eventually all that recovered and subsided.
Did you find your body reacted quite quickly after you had landed?
Yes, I mean to readapt to gravity again. Uh, I was able to stand up right away, walk around right away,
Mm.
but you still use a lot of astronauts when we come off of that spacecraft. Um, we'll use the handrails, you know, for just not because we really need to, but kind of keeps you oriented, and your equilibrium is still a little bit sensitive and maybe a little off. The other thing you'll see astronauts, if they're walking down the hallway after flight, they'll kind of drag their arm across the hall or across the wall,
Yeah.
just to kind of, for reference and steady themselves if necessary. Um, but again, I was able to stand up right away, move around right away. Now, on my last flight was a bit of a compromise because we had participated in a lot of secondary, human physiology experiments, and they want us to limit our activity. Right? They
Right.
they they originally wanted to. You'll see some of the astronauts come off on stretchers or in being carried off the spacecraft, and that's a bit of a compromise. The astronauts don't like that. As a general rule, we don't like to give the impression that we're so incapacitated that we need to be carried off. The reason we're carried off is primarily to support the science. They
Mm.
want to limit the effect of gravity on you during until they can do their blood draws and any muscle biopsies and anything else that might have contributed to their medical protocols.
Yes, yeah, I can see that. So you were sort of a human guinea pig for some of that mission.
Well,
But
it certainly is. I mean, it's you're absolutely a human guinea pig, and that's part of the. I mean, you're a science subject. I mean, that's just part of the experience. That's part of the job, and we all recognize that. It's a bit of a risk, of course, for the astronauts as well, because if you volunteer for one of these medical protocols, and during the workup, which would not be a typical workup for, let's say, an astronaut flight physical, if they find something, they're medically obligated, ethically obligated to do a complete workup.
Yeah.
Well, if that complete workup finds something problematic, you could end up being grounded,
Hmm.
and that ends your flight career. So it's a bit of a risk. I mean,
Yeah.
for astronauts to do that, some are hesitant. I never was. I volunteered for as many of the medical protocols as were offered typically, um, at risk, of course. But again, it's part of the mission. It's why you're there.
Yeah. And Columbia, in its history, was used a lot for microgravity, and space lab research.
Yes.
There's one thing in particular I want to ask you about this mission, STS-62. You mentioned that on STS-48 you had gone for quite a high altitude for the science experiments, but this one you do, if this is correct, the lowest ever orbit flown for something called the spacecraft glow. It's just I
Yes.
couldn't believe it when I saw it. 105 miles. That's very low
That's
for an
very
orbit.
low. Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about this?
Sure. Yeah, that shuttle glow, what we're looking at, I mean, obviously, as you get lower towards the upper atmosphere, you're going to bombard more and more molecules. And that, during that energy transfer, it gives off a bit of a glow. And you can see that with the unaided eye. A lot of the photographs we took were with light amplifiers to kind of accentuate the glow, but you can also see that with the unaided eye. So you're looking at things like atomic erosion and other things. If you're going to park satellites, for example, in a low Earth orbit for extended period of time, you want to understand the effect on the materials. And so that was primarily the science involved there. And there's reasons why you want to park satellites in low Earth orbit for extended periods of time potentially. The and of course your decay rate at that point is significant, right? So your orbit is coming down, probably a mile every 24 hours or so. So it's just a matter of days, certainly a few weeks before you're coming back and you're going to re-enter the atmosphere just on its own, right? There's going to be enough drag to drag you back in.
Yeah, so I wondered about that, whether there was any concern, but at that altitude, the shuttle is going to want to re-enter. Was there any concern about the thermal protection or sort of putting too much stress on your tiles?
Yeah, no, that not that I remember specifically. I mean, um, of course, we recognize that we still had propellant. We can always boost,
Hmm.
right? I mean, we weren't there because um, because we had to be there, because we were propellant critical, right? So we always had the opportunity to reboost if necessary, and we were only there for a relatively short period of time before we did a normal reentry. Anyway, the um, the one from a propellant perspective that I always thought was more interesting was STS-48 because it was a high altitude flight, and we did not do a burn adjust to bring us down to a lower altitude. So if you had a a propellant leak, you could find yourself in somewhat of a critical situation, right? Not being able to develop enough delta V to bring you back down.
Yeah. How high did you get with STS-48 in the end?
Well, we were about 360 nautical miles.
Really? Wow. So that's sort of the same altitude that the Hubble missions were at, almost.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
that's very
Hubble
high
was
for the
Hubble
shuttle.
was yeah, it was high. The Hubble was a little higher than us, but not by
Yeah.
much.
Must have been a magnificent view of the Earth from that altitude. Very different. Yeah.
Well, yeah, every one of these missions was spectacular, and the views were spectacular, but for different reasons, right? And so on STS-48, you had the high inclination flight. I mean, you could see. things that were not normally seen, like the mountains in Antarctica, for example. I mean, that was visible from our vantage point. We passed over, of course, that part of the world every day, many times a day. And I mean, one of my favorite pictures is one of the icebergs. There was 40 by 60 kilometer sheet of ice, right, that was floating around down there in the southern oceans. I mean, you don't get an opportunity to see that, very often.
Hmm.
Uh, at the same time, STS-62 was 37 degrees. We had these magnificent broad passes over the U.S., over Europe, over Africa, South America. So it was, again, all very, remarkably beautiful, but for different reasons.
Hmm. Were you aware on STS-62 that it would be your last flight?
Uh, yes, yeah, I made that decision. I was going to go back to the Army and continue my Army career. So yes.
Yeah, well, three missions and three quite different missions in lots of interesting ways. That's a really great career. Do you have a favorite part of it at all?
I think I don't think I'm unique in this regard. I think that all astronauts, their favorite part of the mission is literally watching the world go by, just continent after continent. I've talked about it many times, just continent after continent after continent slowly passing in the distance. Uh, to me, there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I'm very jealous. Now, you it was an interesting time for NASA, 1994. You're sort of beginning to move into the shuttle Mir era and then the ISS era. Can you tell us a little bit about your post-flight career?
Sure. Yeah. Just like every other astronaut, we have a number of secondary duties and responsibilities. I was involved after my flight with International Space Station kind of development. We were, as you remember, the space station changed significantly from the Space Station Freedom to the International Space Station. Space Station Freedom was a 6 node, 4 tubes and 6 node configuration and a racetrack pattern. Uh, and then we moved on to the Russian, the shuttle Mir, and then International Space Station, following. So there was, and of course at that time Grumman, I believe, was a prime contractor on the Space Station Freedom. Kind of defaulted, and we ended up then Boeing took over that project and redeveloped under the International Space Station when we joined with the international community. So it was an interesting time. So I worked in that development office for a while. In about 1996, I was on assignment to the Undersecretary of Defense for Space at that time. It was a newly created office, and I worked on the strategic planning for classified programs. So we looked at a 25-year horizon for classified programs in space and laid out kind of the framework for what we thought we needed in the Department of Defense, starting at that time, looking forward for the 25 years. Then I retired in 1998, went back to private industry and joined Bombardier Aerospace, Learjet, as part of the flight test management team and as an engineering test pilot for them as well. So extensive testing on the the Canadair regional jets, the Global Express, 5,000, 6,000 at the time, and special mission aircraft. We developed a number of special mission aircraft for militaries around the world, including the U.S. Air Force, and that kind of culminated, with a deployment to Afghanistan. Took one of the special mission aircraft, battlefield airborne communications node, to Afghanistan, and then retired from there about 2015.
Do you still get to fly very much?
I don't fly professionally anymore, but I do fly recreationally. So for years, I had a 1942 Stearman biplane. I was in a partnership there with two other partners. And so we had that, of course, was a World War II training aircraft used around the world. and it was a great airplane, a lot of fun. You feel like it's a cross between being a pilot and a museum curator. You get kind of to do both. And then I also own just a small training aircraft that I bought years ago to try and get my son interested in flying and allow him to build time. And of course, now he's flying for American Airlines. So that all worked out as
Excellent.
well.
Brilliant. Gosh, I imagine if you're flying over in that World War II plane, people on the ground must be looking up and pointing all the time, thinking, "Gosh, look at that!" Amazing.
Well, it's a great airplane, and people love flying it. For years we did sightseeing flights in that airplane as well for the public, not for any other reason, but just to kind of give them an opportunity to experience part of that history.
Yeah. Gosh, amazing. I've got to ask you, with this in mind, did you have a favorite shuttle? Because you flew on Atlantis, Discovery, and Columbia. I know they have slightly different configurations and numbers of tiles, but did you have a favorite one?
Well, I would say that Space Shuttle Atlantis is probably my favorite. Not just because it was the first, but my first flight, but it was also the cleanest spacecraft
Mm.
in the fleet. It was the newest of the three, of course, and we had the fewest issues and problems on orbit with that spacecraft. So I would have to say Atlantis was probably my favorite. And of course, today that's on display at the Kennedy Space Center. So I just spent a little bit of time down there last month, and it's always fun to be back around that spacecraft.
You know,
But they were all great. I mean,
yeah.
they were all great.
Every single astronaut I've ever asked who flew Atlantis says Atlantis is their favorite. It's
Yeah,
remarkable.
it was a very clean airplane. I mean, we just didn't have issues with that spacecraft.
Mm. It's amazing. Do you get to do a lot of science communication then, and still communicating with the public?
Sure. So, I do a combination of a couple things. I'm involved, of course, at the Cape. We have a visiting astronaut at the Kennedy Space Center throughout the year, 365 days a year. So I participate in that, public outreach and community education programs there. And I've also been involved recently with a company called Skill Up Global, which is an online education initiative to bring STEM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, to students all around the globe. And we've done programs in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand. We're going to be at Teesside in Middleborough in first week in November, and then continuing on and doing some programs in Thailand again in October, November timeframe. So I have the opportunity to do some of that. We were in China earlier this year. Look forward to going back next year. So it's that's kind of how I still participate in some of those programs. I consider myself mostly retired, but I still do some public education and mentoring, which I enjoy. The students are fantastic. They're very interested in the subject matter, and it's fun to see them, develop. One of the programs that we do is a CubeSat challenge where the students build their own 10 by 10 centimeter CubeSat. And for some of these young students, it's the first time they've ever actually had a screwdriver in their hand, right? And so to see them go from, they do a design project and then they test the individual components. They build the spacecraft. They do integrated testing. They do data. They take their data. They do data analysis. They write a final report. So it's really they get the whole perspective from project management, from concept all the way through termination of the program, and it's a very rewarding program. It's an exciting program for the students. They love it. We love it. And so that's I've been participating in that now for the last almost going on 3 years now.
Well, we're all about that on the Polymath World. I was actually at a very similar program last week with NASA astronaut Ricky Arnold in London, doing a very similar program with students. It's a life-changing opportunity for them. It can really change the trajectory and the inspiration for a young person.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, especially this last week, I got I got a note from one of our first students that we did, and he was actually from Dubai, and he's at Purdue right now. Just finished up
Wow.
his first year of aerospace engineering, and of course, I remember him. He was a shining star in that first one of those first classes, and so it's really good now to see kind of where he is today.
Well, Purdue, I mean, that's a good omen. Purdue's an astronaut factory, isn't it? I mean, you got Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan, Jerry Ross. Yeah, well, good luck to him. Well, if you're ever in London or in Britain, we'd love to have you as well.
Well, thanks, Sam.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Charles. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, it's really, really wonderful to meet you here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more amazing conversations with incredible researchers who are changing the world we live in and driving humanity forward. Feel free to check out my Instagram at polymath_Sam or go to my website at www.sam-mckee.co.uk.